You're listening to Heal Through Humor, hosted by yours truly, Talia Bombola. I'm a licensed therapist on a mission to help others learn about themselves and laugh along the way. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Heal Through Humor, the live podcast. I'm very excited for today's guest. Let me make sure I get her added in, if Instagram will work. Today, we have Elizabeth Fedrick joining us, and she focuses on a lot of the same topics that I do. Hello, I was just introducing you.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. How's your day going?
It sounds similar to yours, clients, and keeping me busy as usual.
Yes. Yeah, we love it though, I think.
Absolutely. Wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I think you are probably better at introducing yourself than I might be. So why don't you tell us all about yourself?
Sure. Yes. So I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. I own a couple of practices in Arizona. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I specialize in relationships. So my dissertation for my PhD was founded in attachment theory, and that is my passion. That is what I do.
I could not agree more. I think attachment theory is a great foundation to start from. What were some of the points that you gathered that you still remember from your dissertation?
Well, so I actually did it on the relational difference between stay-at-home moms and working moms. So like the quality of the parent-child relationship, and the outcomes were as to be expected, that there wasn't any vast differences. Communication was the main thing that differed. And that was because obviously a stay-at-home mother is with their child a lot more often. But from an attachment theory standpoint, I mean, it was really just, what you and I talk a lot about in our social media in terms of really the impact of those earlier life experiences and how they still show up today.
Yes, they do set the foundation. So I do more from the psychoanalytic perspective and then scoop in attachment styles. And I've been answering some questions over the last couple of days too. So I'm curious to get your take on it. Kind of this fluidity of attachment styles that yes, we have a primary one. Yes, it can change over time. It can go from secure to anxious, anxious to secure. There is something to be said though for that template that I think we operate on. We do kind of regress back to it or circle back to it despite all the therapy and relationship healing we might have. It's so ingrained in us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I love how you're talking about that. It certainly does shift depending on relationship, depending on where we're at in our healing journey. So certainly ebbs and flows in that way. And what, we work with our clients with is the biggest thing is you can work towards secure. And what I like to talk to my clients about is secure enough. Like that's what we're all working towards, is secure enough, because to your point, we're never going to be, nobody is fully secure. And so when we get triggered, we have some, less than ideal sides pop up for sure.
Yeah. And even if I call them the lucky ones, even if we start secure and remain secure, we kind of foster those relationships and friendships. When we have activations or when we have a loss, we lose a pet, we lose a family member, we don't get into the college we wanted to, the person we wanted to date is like, I'm going to do this instead. We still have losses in how we experience our life that can shift maybe momentarily our attachment to that one experience, that one system. It's kind of the bounce back though. If we've been secure the whole time, that's easier. Whereas I think people with learned or earned secure attachment, it's the bounce back that can take a little bit more time, kind of the yo-yo effect. It's like it takes longer to come back up to a neutral baseline, where somebody who's always been secure, always being a relative term, it's like, bloop, okay, now I feel back to being good again or secure enough. And I think that's a good use of the modifier, because how many people who are anxious and avoidant don't feel like they're enough?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just talking to a client about this the other day. She was talking about the people in her life and how the secure people in her life, they're so healthy. They, they're not lonely. They don't get sad. They don't, all these things. And I'm like, but how do you know that? Like, how do you know that to be true? And so we talked through exactly what you're saying. No, they do get lonely and they do get sad, all of those things. But the difference for them is they have a template to know that things will be okay. They have a template to know people are safe. If they have an issue, they know who to go to. That for a lot of us who do not have a base of secure, when we're triggered in that way and when the fear is activated, the first thought is, yeah, we are alone and we don't have a safe place. And so I love how you're putting that. It takes us a little more work to stop and go, okay, wait a minute. Remember my skills, remember my healing, remember what's true.
Yes. And I teach my clients to ask themselves, what evidence do I have?
Yes.
And because when our attachment system gets activated in an overwhelming way, it's our emotion mind and a lot of that part of our nervous system that's getting activated. So we need to like come in and calm it down and regulate. And what evidence do I have? And then they almost go into like a detective mode. Okay, well, they didn't text back or this happened, but this actually has happened before. And it was this, so they can regulate and then learn, oh, wait a second, I can get myself back to a baseline. And that is one of the coolest things that I've seen clients be able to work through, where initially they had no skill on how to do that. Then they come in and learn from us with working with them how to do it. And then they come in and share, I did the thing. I did it all on my own. It's like a proud parent moment.
Of course.
Active experience with them. Yeah.
Of course. And how empowering for the whole room at that point, right? Because it worked and they did it. And when the easier thing would have been to completely dysregulate and unravel, and they chose not to. And that is so empowering and is the snowball effect so that they can do it again the next time around. But yes, evidence, that word, but $1 for every time I said that word in session. There'd be a lot of dollars.
Yeah, I would be so rich. So when we're talking about attachment theory from like both of our lenses, my curiosity to learn more from you and your perspective is when the client goes into or chooses to kind of go into that dysregulated state. I have like my own analytic theory on it. What is your view on that? Like, what do you think their brain or their body is prompting them to do? What are they hoping to achieve by being dysregulated?
Yeah, great question. So I talk a lot to my clients about what I call relational programming. And so the idea that the brain has literally been programmed in the way that it's responding in those moments. And so we know the way the brain fires is the way that it wires. And in childhood, if it had to fire a certain way repeatedly in order to obtain, whether it was protection, connection, safety, attention, like we go through all the words, but whatever they had to do to obtain what they needed in that moment, the brain over time, it was reinforced and they learned that that's what they needed. And so that's what we talk about then in adulthood. I don't believe it is a choice the way that they react. And, it's much more the brain is alerting them to. And when we really look at it from the standpoint of the amygdala, and it is designed to store sensory memory. And so it knows that it thinks it knows that that's a threat, right? And so it's trying to react accordingly. And so that is exactly, it's our protective traits. So that's the approach, that's the stance that I take on it, that when they are being activated and they engage in a reactive manner, they're just trying to stay safe. Like they're just trying to, whatever safety, survival connection.
Yeah, I view it very similarly. I was teaching it to my intro to psych class this morning, actually, and we were talking about when we intake certain information, which route it goes through is like more the primary direct route or the indirect route, which goes through the thalamus differently than when it lands on the amygdala. And we feel so intensely as we're aging until our frontal lobe develops about 25. I've seen some before, some after. I would say there's outliers. We don't think as much as we're feeling. And if we're conditioned, associative learning or operative classically conditioned to be, well, you're so dramatic, well, you're so this, or I had to cry for 5 hours before somebody paid attention, that, like you're saying, that pathway gets built. And then we utilize that same script in our adulthood, not realizing we have so much power in changing it. And I think that's one of the coolest parts about being a therapist who can relate and base their self and their kind of treatment off of attachment theory is we can rewire this. You don't have to operate on the script. Like, let's give the validity and let's give the empathy that we need, and also empower you to realize it doesn't have to stay that way. So it's like, what are you getting from it? Well, I get connection, attention, I get reciprocity, safety. Are there other ways we could possibly get that? Oh yeah, I guess so. And then teaching them how to obtain it from other ways that feel calmer for both parties involved.
Right. Because really when we dissect that, and so funny, I was just yesterday, the client and I were processing through this. And when you dissect it, we think that that's what we're getting out of it, right? We think we're getting connection, protection, safety. but really we're often exacerbating our dysregulation, and we're not truly getting out of it what we're wanting out of it. And so when we can stop, and we talked about the evidence and challenging perspective and what are our other options in that moment. And what's really interesting is for individuals with really insecure attachment styles, and some, along the spectrum, sometimes really severe insecure attachment styles, they really have a hard time seeing that there was any other option.
True.
And so when you ask, okay, what's some other perspectives? What else could have been going on in that moment with that person? Or what's a different way you could have handled it? And there is a moment of really being stumped. And it's in those moments that I just have even that much more empathy for what they're going through, because you can just see it. Like, they're not intentionally trying to be dysfunctional in those moments.
Right.
They literally don't know any different.
Yes. And oftentimes, even before kind of treatment or self-development work, even if it's on their own, reading books, reading Attached, get on anybody's Instagram, looking at it, like, something feels weird when the person doesn't text me back, like Googling it and doing some of their own market research. We sometimes inadvertently, this is repetition compulsion in psychoanalysis, we pick people who confirm that bias that we have, or almost encourage the dysregulation because they themselves in a different way are dysregulated. So if I need to take an exceptional amount of space to feel calm, but you need an exceptional amount of closeness to feel close, it's like, we're not going to be getting along, because what activates me is what soothes you. And so this chase happens, and then that confirms the belief of, well, I'm not good enough, I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm better off alone, everybody always wants too many things from me, I just want to be independent. It's like a magnet. We end up partnering with people like that, because it means even more, and I'm former anxiously attached, it means even more if I'm able to break down these walls and get behind them, because it's like, ooh, you must really love me if you let me in, versus it being, my now person who's so secure, I'm just like, cool, this feels good, like we are solid.
Right. You did the funniest video on a similar concept. You have to repost that. That had me cracking up. And it's exactly it. You're like, don't do it. Don't do it. And then you just can't help it. And that's exactly, the anxious just comes out. And that is what's happening. And that ties into the relational programming. And that's exactly why I use that term, is because we're programmed based on these previous life experiences. And so we seek out what's familiar. And so those people who trigger us in those ways and activate that's probably pretty similar to a parent, to a sibling, to a caregiver of sorts. And so it's what we know. And we seek it out, and we replay the narrative. And for a lot of people, that replaying the narrative on an unconscious level is trying to correct the narrative, right? Like, maybe if this person accepts me, then the belief I have is not true.
Yes, I've worked with a lot of clients where their relationship, the view that they have of one or both parents is pretty negative, or it's very ruptured, and the associations they have with the parent or the primary caregivers are really overwhelming for them to even process. That is, though, in some ways, maybe we don't lead with it. In my work, what I've seen be successful is it is a necessary part, even if the parent never comes in the room or they never have the out loud conversation, doing a bit of empty chair technique, writing a letter, let's have some of that reparative experience on the parent or primary caregiver level, because that's the template we base it off of. And eventually when we start to shift and not see, if we can, our parent as negative, or they were never there for me, or they were, too preoccupied, etc., we can start to have a little bit more grace, empathy, and still hold them accountable. I'm not saying just let it go and forgive everything, but I didn't like this. I felt missed in these ways. And as I've gotten older, I understand there's no way the unconditional love that I received in infancy could be replicated year after year when we got older and you had to work and we had other siblings, and we have that still part of us, that's that infant-like mindset, if you will, where we expect unconditional love from everyone, including our primary caregivers. But going back and repairing the way that we view them also helps us pick different friends and different dating partners, because now we kind of have an upgraded, like a software update, our template looks different.
Yeah, I agree. And in addition to that, when I do EMDR, I do something similar where we're kind of what I call rewriting the narrative. And I'm sure plenty of clinicians do that, but that's kind of the verbiage I use around it. And it's similar to what you're saying, but also a different approach that I take is for the client to really sit in what they needed in that moment. So the caregiver couldn't show up, and we can have empathy and understanding for the caregiver, absolutely. But also, regardless of the reason the caregiver couldn't show up in the way that the client needed, it still did damage, and the damage is there and it's very active. And so we do a lot of work around, you know, what did that 7-year-old need? What did that 4-year-old need? And for them to really, as you're saying, so similar to the empty chair, but they're playing out the scenario in their head of rewriting what they needed, somebody showing up or their adult self showing up, you know? So it is building this template that you can keep yourself safe and you can provide yourself with the nurture you need.
Yeah, I do a guided inner child meditation when I do some workshops on self-worth, and it's kind of my kink, but it leaves everybody in tears, but in like a healthy, cathartic way, because it moves them so much of like, I never realized I was holding on to that, or how much I could go back and reparent myself and give attention to my inner child and the other ages, like kind of the IFS work of the other parts in the states that live inside of me. And now I can feel more whole and calm and integrated. I won't feel as dysregulated when I know somebody, i.e. in childhood, ideally my parents, but in adulthood can be me, has control and can help me feel safe and contained. And even if we have the most secure relationship with our partner, they have work. They need to go to the restroom. They have other friends. Like, they have times where they're not going to be with us all the time. And we also need to know how to self-regulate when we're activated, even if it's separate, right? I could have had a stressful day at work and he might not be there at the end of the day because he's at work. Okay, what am I going to do instead? I could go to yoga. I could call a friend. It's having that toolbox, I think, that helps also.
Yeah, for sure. Because otherwise we do just resort back to the insecure. And now we are berating him and telling him what a horrible human he is because he was at work. And
be there for me all the time, always. It's like, what?
Exactly. But that desperation feels so real in those moments of like, see, nobody's ever there for me. And it's like, okay, well, let's stop. And really, is this coming from a place of truth or of trauma? You know, and that is such a important distinction to make.
Yeah, one of my mentors, it's similar logic. It sounds like calling it wound versus wisdom, where it's really coming from. And again, do you have evidence of it in this current relationship? And that's a key distinction. Many clients do have evidence of it in previous relationships.
Yes.
And I think my co-host from one of my other podcasts, Ryan, and I just did an episode waiting for the other shoe to drop. Why, now that I'm finally in a healthy relationship, why am I still on high alert? It's because you're running on a different operating system and you needed to be on such high alert before to keep yourself safe. Now that you can relax and enjoy a healthy relationship, all those other parts of you that were there to keep you safe are kind of like, hi, we'd like a job. Like, I wasn't ready to retire. I'm ready to be your security guard. And then we have to go in and have a talk and be like, okay, I don't need you as much. I don't need that firefighter part of me as much, or that manager part of me as much. I can replace it with enjoyment and integration of a calmer self.
Absolutely. And this is where we so commonly see the self-sabotaging behaviors come in. And that is,
dive into that.
Yeah, that is the most common thing that we see when a brain that's wired for chaos serves stability. We don't know what to do with the stability. Like, what is this? What are you handing me?
I don't. And one of my favorite analytic papers is called "You're Giving Me What I Need, but I Have No Place to Put It."
Yes.
That really accurately describes that. Okay, my nervous system is used to DEFCON 5 and now it's chill. What
do I do?
It is.
Yes. And unfortunately, as we know, then it's like, well, then let's create the chaos. Let's figure it out. Who's going to show up to this party? And so that's a lot what we talk about is like, okay, you are going to have that temptation and that craving to create that dopamine spike and to get your brain to really be activated, because that's what's going on. Because we crave the heightened sense of like this chaos, because we often know, especially with the trauma bond, when it comes back down, we get to feel connected and we get to feel loved and adored and all of that sick stuff that's really sad, because that becomes the link that happens. And so we talk about when that starts to activate. So we're like, okay, this person's nice, i.e. boring. Okay. So like,
and safe. Ew, they text me back. Gross.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what do we do with that? We've got to find other ways. And you were saying it earlier, we've got to find other ways to respond to that. We've got to find other ways to activate our brain in healthier ways. And the other part of that is that humans are designed for adaptation. And so we are going to find healthier ways to do it.
Yeah.
And those healthier ways are not going to be as exciting or as intriguing as the chaos.
Yeah.
But if we do it over time and repeatedly, as with anything, our brain will adapt to it and that will start to become our norm. But we have to give it time.
Yeah. Consistent reinforcement is the strongest schedule in terms of once we feel safe, we seek that out. But the intermittent positive reinforcement is the strongest in terms of keeping us hooked on something. That's where gambling comes in, the promise of something. Sometimes they text you back, sometimes they don't. You kind of create an addictive relationship or a reliant relationship on the high highs and the low lows. So it's like, it feels like a roller coaster, and nobody wants to leave Six Flags even when the park closes because it's so fun. And it's like, oh, I could have just as much fun in a different direction and it will feel differently if I know every day I could go back to the roller coaster place that I'm going to, right, mentally. And it's not going to be the same high highs and low lows. I can now find comfort in reliance, and you're there for me, and you are texting me, and you're giving me all these things that I may have always wanted in childhood or adolescence that I didn't feel worthy of. Then I do a lot of self-worth work and self-esteem work with my clients, so they actually have the place to put these kind of metaphysical things that they're being given when they get somebody secure who's healthy. Otherwise they will be like, ew, I don't know what to do with this. Like, why are you being nice to me?
Yes, and the withdrawal symptoms as well that come along with it, as you're talking about the amusement park. Yes, and so that is that simultaneous of like, okay, this is safe, so this feels weird. And then if they are still coming off of a trauma bond, so they have the withdrawal symptoms simultaneously, that can create quite the cocktail for destructive behavior. Do you talk with your clients about, like, does the withdrawal symptoms come up quite a bit in the work you do?
Yeah, I tell them that it's very difficult for them to, I used to work in like a drug treatment center, so I use terminology, and I'm like, it's very difficult to enjoy weed once you've gotten hooked on heroin.
I say the same.
Yeah. You can't sit there and be like, oh, this is delicious. Like, you're used to something so much more intense and chaotic. This is supposed to feel the same. And it is going to be a withdrawal, because you are also, even if they don't realize it at the time, they're creating a system and a cycle that reinforces the low self-worth and low self-esteem. So the part of them that feels unworthy also is feeling very chaotic and shut down, when the other parts of them start to get on board with feeling the self-worth and the self-esteem rise up. That part of them is also going through withdrawal. Hey, wait a second, I had this belief about myself my whole life and we're just fine with ourselves now. We have to work on integrating the other parts that may be going through withdrawal too.
Absolutely. I love, very well put. That's exactly it. That adaptation process is, and talking through, I love that you're bringing up the self-worth piece of it, because I talk with my clients about that. Like, so let's say we do regress and we fall back into an old pattern, or like we were saying earlier, into the insecure attachment. And it is the tendency to then shame and blame and berate that part of you. That is just trying to protect itself.
Yes.
And that is not what it needs, and so then we even pause in that moment. Okay, so what part of you is coming up? What does that 5-year-old little boy, little girl, what did they need? Okay, well, they needed compassion. They needed validation, empathy, reassurance. Okay, so let's pause and provide that.
Yes.
And see how that feels for you versus shaming yourself for having a basic human need.
Nobody, and this is so innate for humans, nobody wants to be seen as needy or really like have needs. And I talked about that with my students, I think it was last week when we were covering it. We were starting to cover this whole topic, sharing with them. I'm like, do you shame yourself for needing to go to the restroom? Do you shame yourself for needing to breathe oxygen? No. Most of them were like, no, I don't do that. They're like, that's silly. And I'm like, okay, so let's go with that. How does that translate then to some other needs, relational needs, emotional needs, physical needs? we can adopt that mindset of this is, of course I need this. Of course this is normal. This is something that is a survival need in a different sense, a more relational sense. So adopting that mindset, I like to search for my clients' strengths when it comes to working with them. And if they are able to do a skill in one other area, great. Let's apply it to another area. You can know and accept yourself for having this need. Can we do the same thing or a similar thing for these other needs that you're learning how to have, and to not be seen as needy, because we don't want to be seen as weak, because we don't want to be seen as prey for a predator. It goes back to that very basic evolutionary psychology and that primal feeling of, I want to be protected, I want to be safe. There are certain things I need to do and certain ways I need to be in order for that to happen. Still true, but we can modify that more with earned secure attachment.
Sure. And as you're saying, use the evidence log. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing by pulling on their strengths in other areas, right? It's like, here's some evidence to support you are capable, you are able to do this. Mm-hmm. And so then they can start to adapt that as well. Because a lot of, even when we think about why we need to be accepted and the fear of rejection, and we talk about that from an evolutionary standpoint, and that fear of rejection and what that meant from a tribal perspective of that equating to death. Yeah. And a lot of people don't, they sit down with me and they say, okay, I just really want to be accepted by people. So I know I messed up for that. I know I'm so dysfunctional, fix me. And I'm like, you're human.
Needed it to live. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, it's a powerful thing to realize, right? That like, maybe we aren't all quite as dysfunctional as we think or feel. And there is hope.
Yes. And I think some of us were told certain narratives when we were growing up, of course, primary caregivers, teachers, parents of friends that we had when we were hanging out at their house, that there's a lot of subconscious or subliminal messaging that we received around what do people who have needs get described as, what needs are okay and what needs are not okay. Were big feelings allowed in your house? Were feelings at all allowed in your house? Who set the emotional tone of your household? When clients can sit there and realize, I'm like, you're not messed up. We all have stuff. We all have stuff. And the people that you got your stuff from had their own stuff. And if we're not working on a generational level to start unpacking it, or like Marie Kondoing it, basically, like, this does not bring me healing and secure attachment, thank it and let it go. It's a requirement to do a lot of that intergenerational work. And there's oftentimes I've sat with clients like the first of their family to go to therapy. Mm-hmm. And that's a really, it can feel like a cross to bear, but it's a really big honor and a gift to give to themselves and future generations who come from their family lineage, whatever that might look like, even if it just ends with them. What is it like to not have to carry on to multiple decades or years of that trauma, and to repackage it and let it go so it isn't weighing you down?
Right. And I talk a lot about that. Healing is how we break the cycle. And there's no way for us to break out of that intergenerational, those chains, unless we're willing to do the healing needed. And on top of that, then I also work to normalize for the individual sitting in therapy that there's a good chance we're going to do a little damage to our kids too. And that is just normal. And I tell them, clients say to me all the time, this is why my kid's going to be in therapy. And I'm like, and I'm a therapist and mine likely will be as well. So it is like, it is part of the process, because we are imperfect humans raising additional imperfect humans. And so the idea that we have to go to therapy, or that your child might have to go to therapy, that is not a reflection of how much you care about them or how horrible you mess them up. That is a reflection of, we're all human and we all have our adaptive traits, and we just got to figure it out. And so if anything, you're setting the stage that it's okay for your child to go to therapy by you being in therapy.
Yeah. And I normalize it's totally healthy and actually very beneficial to have somebody outside of yourself to talk to for an hour a week, who's designed to help you feel regulated, feel sane, feel calm, feel like you have a safe place to let all of your feelings out, think about things, share your opinions. It's like kind of all floors of the human elevator, as I call it. That's totally normal. We can't be everything for ourselves. We can't be everything for another person. It takes a village to raise a person, and we're still raising ourselves even in adulthood. And I think that's the part of sharing where we were talking about in the beginning. we can go through and give ourselves what we may have needed in those moments that we were missed, and view differently why that could have been difficult for our parents or primary caregivers to give that to us. Sometimes that happens while we're actually raising our kids and it's happening in lifetime. And sometimes it happens previous to those moments and we'll still mess up. We're only human at the end of the day, and we don't know everything about ourselves or about other people. There's no one person, I think, who's like, I am an expert on all things human at all points, and I never get hungry, I never get hangry, I never don't sleep. Like, we're not robots. We have basic biological needs too that sometimes we deny because of other reasons.
Right. And that show up in not great ways. And the hangry thing, I may or may not be able to relate to. That's not my son. Actually, he says to me, it was probably about a year ago, I was potentially on edge, and he goes, I know, Mom, it's okay, I'm hungry too. I was like, thanks, kiddo. Like, thanks for getting it. Also, thanks for the subtle cue. I'll tone it down. Like.
Yes. Everyone in my family knows when I'm hungry. Just leave me alone.
Yes.
I get quiet. I don't want to talk. I'm very solution focused. I'm like, I need food immediately, and I have snacks everywhere and protein shakes everywhere. And I was in the car the other day, and I'm like trying to clear out. I'm like, I have like 5, because I drink the like Premier protein shakes. Delicious. I have like 5 of them empty just in my passenger seat. I'm like, this looks like I have a problem. Like, but it's me knowing that I need to meet those needs, because I unbecome myself when I pass a certain threshold of not meeting my own needs. And I think that can be extrapolated and true for most people. We don't function properly when we're not relating to other people, when we're too isolated, when it's too much of a struggle to try and gain connection with another person. We end up feeling exhausted, and we don't really seem like ourselves. I don't know if you've had clients who've come in and shared that, but they're going through a relationship struggle, or they're like maybe just left a really unhealthy relationship, and their friends are like, I'm so glad you're out of it. And they almost are like taken aback by that comment, or like, well, why didn't you say anything? We did try to tell you like the whole time, but you either weren't wanting to hear it, which is fine, or we were afraid to say anything because you seemed like so intent on making that work, but we're happy you're out of it.
Yeah. And that's actually the hungry analogy. That's brilliant. I'm going to start using that going forward, because that is exactly when I talk with people about being in a toxic relationship, one of the ways that I have them assess that is, when you feel activated in this relationship, do you end up acting in a way that is out of character for you, in a way that you're like, who is this person? Embarrassed, all of those things. And again, when you and I get overly hungry, that's exactly that side of us comes out. And so for them to have that awareness that doesn't mean that you are a toxic person or that you are a dysfunctional person. That means that dynamic is bringing out the worst side of you. Yes. And that's really worth examining. And you're right. A lot of times friends are like so relieved by that, because they often get their friend back. They get that person back who is not in such a threat state all of the time.
Yeah. And the experience that the person is going through when they're kind of reacquainting themselves to their normal homeostasis or their baseline, it is going to be uncomfortable at first. Not only all the hormonal shifts happening when you get out of a relationship, regardless of the health of it, you're having withdrawals from oxytocin, you're out of a routine, you don't have the person to text anymore. That's like one scoop of the sundae. You add the other scoop that it wasn't healthy relating, so it was likely a lot of that intermittent positive reinforcement. And then like the whipped cream on top is, oh, now I have to go explain to my friends I can be back with them, or we can hang out again. And then making some repairs along the way that we might not know that we have to. It's still worthwhile to do that. It's worth leaving a relationship that doesn't allow you to be your full authentic self. And what a great question, be able to have your clients ask themselves, who do you become in this relationship? And a lot of the people I've worked with who are on the fence, do I stay, do I go? What would it cost me? Who will I be if I stay in this relationship? In both senses. Who am I going to become, and who will I not become if I stay? And that, for a lot of my clients, they're like, I thought about that for like hours after you said that in session. And I'm glad that even one question can really have them think differently about the trajectory of their life.
Yeah, yes, and that's absolutely right. I mean, that a relationship truly does have that power to
Oh
completely
yeah.
shift what direction we
Yeah.
go and how we show up and all of those things. And yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I that your Sunday analogy, like it really made me stop and think. And I think, you know, for people tuning into this, like knowing that's what somebody's going through, that's like even more like we need to have empathy for that experience for them. We need to understand like them being in that dysfunctional relationship was not them choosing to be stupid or
No.
weak or any of those things. Like there's so much more going on there. And the way you described that of like when they choose to leave, all the different elements that they're experiencing, that's incredibly overwhelming.
Oh yeah. And speaking of the overwhelm that we already feel when we're insecurely attached, now there's shame or there's guilt or there's rejection and sadness. And I think oftentimes when somebody leaves, either even if it's anxious avoidant feedback loop relationship all the way to severely unhealthy relationship, that we don't get to feel sad. We were the
Mhm.
stupid ones, we didn't see it coming, they were mean to me, I deserve all of these low self-worth, shame, and guilt narratives come up where the person is almost not that this is my favorite term, but they've almost you can't really gaslight yourself because it's another person doing it, but you've manipulated what you're worth in your own mind, or you've associated, well, I'm only worth this or I'm worth nothing, to the point where you don't even allow yourself to grieve or feel the sadness, feel what it was like to either choose to leave or be left by somebody who wasn't the kindest to you or who muted your ability to be your authentic self. You're absolutely allowed to grieve that, even if you were an active participant in the relationship that wasn't healthy for you. This is a learning experience, and it's an opportunity to know why you were even attracted to that or attractive to that person in the first place, and then pick differently the next time.
Yes, I mean, and so true. It is still, at the end of the day, it's still a loss. If it
Yes.
was toxic, abusive, all of those things, it's still a loss of connection. And
Yeah.
that is something that having empathy for ourselves in those moments, but also if you have a friend that's experiencing this, just being cognizant of that. Like, yes, we want to throw a party and be so excited that they're done with that situation, but that's not what they need in that moment. Like, they need to be held and really supported through that
Yeah.
heartbreak and the hurt feelings for sure.
Yeah, it's the question, how can I best support you when we hear
Yeah.
news? And I definitely learned that when I was doing some grief counseling training, talking to clients, and what we share when we hear that, because humans are mostly uncomfortable. We don't have a lot of language around loss and grief and ambiguous loss. And there are so many different kinds of grief, but we're taught, especially in Western society, to really only associate it with death. But there's ego deaths, there's soul deaths, there's losses of a relationship, there's a death of a dream of a career, there's so many other losses that we have. It's best practice to check in and ask the person, it sounds like, and then just reframe what they're saying. How can I best support you, or what do you need? And
Mhm.
being able to not jump to, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, oh, they're in a better, any of the really unhelpful grief terms. Because there's one time we were practicing and we did a practice session, I told the client, and they were just like, don't be, I hated that person. And I was like, wasn't expecting that response. You have to be on your feet about it. So it's best to just share, how do you feel about that, rather than projecting or having your own emotional reaction of how you would feel if that happened to you. You don't know the person that they lost. They might not be ready to have the party thrown for them right then. Doesn't mean 3 months from now you can't throw them a divorce party, but maybe in the beginning, ask them what they would benefit from.
Right, right. And yes, holding space for that and asking the questions of what is this like for you? What are you experiencing right now? Asking instead of just assuming to know the emotion. And I do that a lot with my clients as well. Obviously that piece as a therapist, but the other
Yeah.
piece of asking, you know, what do you need from me right now? Which as a therapist, you know, a lot of the expectations is that we should know we have this magic pill, magic wand.
Yeah.
Right, right. But it is so unique, especially the grieving process and the toxic relationship process. Every human experience is so unique. And so I found that to be those two both being the most powerful of, you know, what is that like for you? What are you experiencing? And then also, what are you needing? How can, as you're saying, how can I best show up for you right now? And they might say, I don't know, or they might say nothing, or all of those things. And Okay, so then sit in it with them.
Yes. Yeah. I've given the example since, I don't even know, years ago, since I first ever started, that I'm like, sometimes you feel like you're in like a pit, just kind of like in a rut, in a hole, and it just feels dark and cold and scary, and you don't really know how to get out of it, or you might not feel ready to get out of it. And I like kind of build a ladder and I have like a little lantern. I'm just shining a little light in your pit, and I'm like your pit partner. Like, I'll just sit there with you until you're ready to climb out. Otherwise, we can just kind of take a look and be like, oh, I didn't really notice that wall over there. Oh, looks like there's a river. You can be in the experience with them without feeling as though you also are in the pit in your own way and separate from being a therapist. That translates into other people in their life. You don't have to have gone to graduate school in order to be a supportive listener. It is a learned skill. Listening and communicating are very learned skills. We happen to be very skilled at it. We've dedicated thousands of hours of our life to it and really perfecting it. These are skills, though, that can be used by any human being who chooses to really learn them and make practice of it, instead of responding gut reaction or assuming what another person's going through. How we really essentially are trained in therapy and graduate school to shift that is, yes, it could be that, and what else could it be? So let's be curious. And then if the client shares that it is how you imagined it or how it was for you, you could use a little self-disclosure if appropriate. You could also just frame the situation. It sounds like, listing out exactly how it felt for you without saying it, and then you share, does that land? And the client could be like, not at all. And you're like, well, I'm so glad I didn't bring up my own thing. Or they say, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. How did you know? It's learning just the timing of disclosures, timing of what your questions are and what you're listening to. That's really helpful. And you don't need to be a therapist for that or talk to a therapist for that. We're more skilled at it. But again, that's because we dedicated our lives to it. People can do that on a small dose level just by reading different books and thinking about conversations differently.
Yeah, exactly. And the pit analogy that you're using, I mean, that's the difference with the verbiage of I'm here with you versus I'm here for you.
Yes.
And when you're sitting there in that pit, I'm here with you. Like, I'm in it with you, versus they don't need you to rescue them. They don't need you to come up with a solution. And I think all of that absolutely is so true. And then even as you're describing the self-disclosure piece, and you're referring to it from a therapeutic perspective, but I think that translates even directly over to friendship, right?
Yeah.
Because how often you're venting about a story and then somebody wants to jump in and tell you all about how the same exact thing happened to them, and you're like, yeah, bro, not helpful. Like, not what I'm needing.
That's not it. We're not done with me. And then we feel like we're narcissistic or any of those other terminologies when we try and bring the conversation we brought up to them back to us. And then they accuse us. They're like, it's not all about you. It's like, but it was
started.
Bringing it up to talk to you about me. It's about me.
Right. That self-awareness is so huge. Like, sometimes you being able to relate is helpful. Sometimes it is not. Learn to read the room. It will go a really long way.
Yes. And asking, hey, I actually think I may have gone through something similar. Can I share?
Yes.
Saves a lot of strife, because the other person might go, absolutely not. Please not share. And then you have to sit and go, okay.
Just kidding.
Yeah, they might not want the help that you think would be helpful.
Yes.
Sometimes you think is helpful is not helpful for the other person. In fact,
right.
Very harmful to the conversation of them feeling validated if you interject, well, this was just like when this, and you can see the visible shutdown of the person go, okay, well, I guess this conversation's over with.
That got derailed. And hopefully you have the awareness. I mean, I guess that's another good tip that you're adding on top of this. Yeah. When you're providing validation and support for somebody, maybe be aware of their nonverbals, be aware of how they're reacting. Because the common behavior, like, really is somebody shutting down, right? That's a perfect example of that. When you start to provide what you think is support or help, and you see that other person just pull back into themselves, probably a good indicator that that's not what they were looking for.
And it's okay to kind of metaphorically fall on the knife and go, I am guessing by your body language that wasn't helpful. Can I just rewind and we can restart? It lets you know that you're being attuned to the person in that moment. And that links back to secure attachment. We have an easier time attuning, seeing when attunement is needed, and knowing when it might be a little bit too much, or we're kind of bordering on it feeling like an engulfment. we can pull back a little bit, and being able to tolerate that another person's emotional state and system does not have to be impinging upon mine. We can be two separate selves having an experience where we're looking at it from the like kind of two sides of the same coin, but I'm not going to go in and caretake or rescue or try and get my partner out of feeling a certain way because them feeling this way makes me uncomfortable. I can separate and go, I don't love this, but it's also not my frustration. So how can I sit here and be there with / for them? I think that's kind of the secure attachment, is both in a healthy, regulated and modulated.
Knowing that difference between empathy and enabling is such a powerful thing. That is something I talk a lot about, because that empathy is, you know, you had a really rough day at work. Do you want to tell me about it? What do you need? And that enabling is allowing the abusive or dysfunctional behaviors that come from being in that threat state. And so, and a lot of clients will say, well, they had a hard day, so like I just didn't say anything when they lashed out like that. And that falls into the enabling category. We can show up and have compassion for somebody and still have boundaries around how we allow them to treat us. And that's something to be like, that falls right in line with what we're talking about with providing support. We have to know how to do it with validation and empathy, but not be the punching bag.
Yes. And maybe in the moment we don't bring it up.
Sure.
Emotions are heightened. We're allowed to kind of set it afterwards. There absolutely are times where we have to put our foot down mid-conversation of like, we're not going to be able to, not even yelling. If that comes up again, or if that phrasing is used again with me, I'm going to let you know I will be walking away in order to protect myself and end this conversation. Please do not come after me. I'm also very comfortable with boundaries because I don't really take shit from people, but I'm very kind about it. And I think knowing where I'm okay and not okay with being treated and spoken to, I lead with that already. So it's rare that somebody approaches me in a way that I will not tolerate. It's most of the time a reminder of, I understand you're frustrated. I totally understand. And I would like to help you. I'm not able to help you if I'm the object now of your frustration in this moment. Can we have a different conversation? And I think being able to redirect or share afterwards, hey, I know you were really stressed earlier. I did want to mention when this term was used, I felt hurt. In the future, could we not use that with each other? I didn't say you once. The person's not going to get defensive because I'm like a word ninja. And they're going to go, oh yeah, no problem. Versus sharing in the moment and being just as angry because we got activated. How do we sit with it and go, ooh, I didn't love that. Yes, they are frustrated. I will set the boundary later.
Yes. And that's a great point of doing it. You're doing it almost, you're stopping it in the moment. So you're not feeling, we don't need to go into a long, deep conversation about how you hurt my feelings right now when you're so dysregulated.
Right.
But also like, you can't keep doing it. Yeah. So yes. And that's an important distinction. And that is also okay to do. Like as hard of a day as they had, as big of an emotion that they're feeling, you are still allowed to have boundaries with how they are coming at you in that moment. And so that's a great way to put it of, hey, you know, if this happens again, this is what's going to result in it. And that sometimes gets ahead of the anxious attachment and all of that as well, because a lot of times if somebody is sitting in their big emotions and they're lashing out at you, and so then you just get up and walk away and you feel justified in doing that because they're being an asshole. So you're like, I'm going to remove myself. But then that activates their insecure attachment and now we're
and now you're
kaboom.
House and the other person's like, they won't leave me alone. I'm like, well, did you, and I'm not putting this in quotes to minimize it, I'm putting this in quotes so we can frame it. I'm like, did you abandon them? And I hold it like this and they're like, oh, I did. They're like an air traffic controller. They're like, I did the thing. I did do that. I could see how that would be perceived as abandonment. I apologize. Taking accountability for their behaviors instead of defensively positioning themselves as, well, I was justified in doing it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how the experience was for your partner before we're able to really go in and regulate. Yes, we need to do this differently next time.
Yes, that's very well said. And what a powerful thing for both partners, for their attachment experience to be taken into account, even in the midst of chaos, that two truths can exist. We can be in conflict and still remain connected. And the way we do that is by being aware of each other's attachment styles, each other's raw parts, what gets activated, and being sensitive to that, even when you're angry. And All of that sounds really big and crazy and bizarre for a lot of people, but it is possible. It takes a lot of work, but it is possible.
Yes, I would love to have you on again if you want to dive in more to like boundaries, setting boundaries, assertiveness. It sounds like you and I relate on that level, which is very nice and comfortable for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would love that. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Okay, cool. We have one last question. Oh, he's from one of my favorite people. How do we self-soothe when someone walks away like that and won't engage further?
Dave. Good question, Dave. That's being aware of the coping skills that we were talking about earlier, that you have your toolkit prepared. And it's having the awareness that if they're choosing to walk away, they're clearly feeling just as activated as you are. There's a good chance that them staying in the room with you is not going to turn out well for anyone. And so for you to be able to self-soothe in that moment, whatever that means for you, that's going to be really specific for you. And so that might mean maybe you are going for a walk, maybe you are going in the other room, maybe you're pulling up TikTok. I mean, it really is. Sometimes it's okay to distract yourself. It doesn't always have to be like, you don't need to go sit and meditate. Like sometimes just distract yourself, allow the nervous system to come down. And then that conversation though, because if somebody has a pattern of doing that, if somebody has a pattern of abandoning you in those moments,
right,
that's a bigger issue and definitely should be discussed afterwards. What is your take on it? What would you suggest?
I would say using a lot of the DBT distract skills. So put your face, submerge it in cold water, ice pack on the neck, get your nervous system back to feeling calm in a baseline, and then using the distraction skill. Sometimes we're so frazzled we can't even reach for the distraction skills. So going to that automatic kind of trying to soothe the nervous system on both, like we're trying to activate one and deactivate the other. Let's get to a nice baseline, then use the distract skills, and then calmly share with our partner, I understand if you need to take space, if it's not the pattern that we're talking about, which we can get at. I understand you need to take space. I'm all for it. When you do, can you tell me a time, even if it's a generous amount, 45 minutes, and come back around that time? That helps me to be ready to tackle this when you get back, or to not feel so frazzled that the second you walk in the door, I'm ready to go again. See what that would be my kind of tidbit to leave Dave with.
I completely agree. And I think that when it comes to using timeout as a tool, first of all, that is one of my favorite tools because I know I need that. That's the only way I get my prefrontal cortex back online is by having space from that person who is activating me. And so yes, so that having ground rules for your timeout can be really effective. So that's established when you're in a safe, calm state and you're talking about, what does this look like? What is the signal we give each other? Do we start with, like you're saying, is it 20, 30 minutes we start with? And then the piece of that is then after you come back after the 20 or 30 minutes, part of these ground rules are that you're allowed to say, I need more time. And so that is acceptable too. But to your point, and especially for the anxious attachment, you have to come back. Like you have to come back if you want to work towards secure enough for either one of you. If you want to work towards repair. If the goal is to continue to go down a negative path, keep doing what you're doing. And I've joked with clients about that too. I'm like, if you would like to end up hating each other, don't change anything. And they're like, okay, well, we don't want that. I'm like, I know, that's why you're here. So I need you to do this. And I know it's not comfortable. I know it's foreign, but the good news is you can learn to make it a second nature. It's not supposed to feel totally normal or feel like a mastered skill the first time you do something new, especially if it's directly opposing what the old thing was. Completely.
So, it's grace and some compassion.
Totally. And when it is so foreign, it feels so foreign. We don't want to do it, but we can make it muscle memory. Great point.
Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to having you on again. And
absolutely.
If this is going to stay on my page, I'll invite you as a collaborator if you want to add it to your page. And I will talk to you very soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. Have a good day.
All right. Talk later.